My name is Kate Hawley. I'm the Area Operations Manager for Forest Services. I wasn't planning to come into forestry. I ended up coming into forestry sort of by accident. I studied geophysics at university and geology, and I ended up being accepted onto the Forestry Commission's graduate programme, which was meant for non-foresters. So I joined that in 2010, and I worked for a short time as an operational forester in Scotland. I moved to Wales and worked for forest research, and then I moved to England, and I've sort of worked my way through England working in partnership, operational roles and other forestry roles. Even when I joined in 2010, which was quite recently, if you think about it, I was a bit embarrassed almost when I told my family and friends I was going into forestry. The Forestry Commission as an organisation definitely felt slightly different. I remember in those early days I would go days and days and days without seeing another woman at all. It was a very male-dominated workforce that I came into, and that was really challenging. People were really nice and people were supportive, but I felt very much like a kind of square peg in a round hole. At times that did feel a little discouraging, but over the last 15 years, and I've been part of the organisation now for 15 years, I have seen a real sort of 180 there, and it just feels like a much more safe place to be now. And that is partly because I look around and I see people that look like me. There are lots of women at different stages of the organisation, both in admin roles but also in senior roles. In my part of the organisation, our chief executive is a woman, and half of the board are female. So that's massive compared to 15 years ago, where it was mainly just men. Now I think that people genuinely consider forestry as a career that doesn't just look like driving a harvester or a tractor in a wood, and instead realising that there's the kind of the ecological side, the relationship management side. There's lots of different ways that you can be a forester and be a woman in forestry that perhaps doesn't look like what it used to. But that being said, we also have lots of women in those more operational roles, and that's great too. So it's a really varied role, and that's what I like. Every day looks different. Sometimes I'm out in the beautiful countryside, sometimes I'm down with our national team discussing sort of national policy. Sometimes I'm working on recruitment and trying to build a kind of dream team for the area, bringing more people into forestry. And sometimes I'm having difficult or interesting conversations with stakeholders and landowners about how can we best work at a landscape scale to make forestry a priority in the northeast of England. So day to day, it's around helping with quite contentious schemes that we might have in terms of complicated woodland creation or woodland management schemes. It's also around helping both my organisation and also the wider sector understand the grants and regulations that are offered by the Forestry Commission. I spend a lot of time speaking with agents and landowners about the opportunities, and I really, really enjoy that. Very much about the right tree in the right place, right? We use that phrase all the time in the Forestry Commission, and some people think it's overused, but I think it's really key. Ultimately, forestry is a real gift if it's in the right place, and sometimes it's not the right place. And thankfully the organisation now has ecologists, historic environments, archaeologists, people to make sure that the woodland creation and the forestry that we do is ultimately going to be beneficial for both Britain and sort of for the wider visitors to the area for the next 50 to 100 years. So we've definitely moved away from that sort of very blocky conifer plantation of sort of the 60s and 70s that I think a lot of people had in their mind as being very reminiscent of the Forestry Commission. But that's not to say that there's no place for plantation forestry. The forest sector in Britain is really, really important, and we want to grow that sector. And we know that the British people want to use timber that has been grown in Britain. We don't want to import anymore.
So how do you think we can square that circle in terms of the interest of the Forestry Commission and other interested parties? Yeah,
so it's a really interesting conundrum. There's a lot of relationship management, and it's all about collaborative working. The Forestry Commission, we don't work in silo. How do we empower the sector and encourage plantation forestry, but making sure that it is, like I say, the right tree in the right place. When we create new woodlands, or we grant fund new woodlands that are created by private landowners, there's a huge consultation process that happens, because we have to make sure that it's appropriate for that area. So loads of individuals are involved in that. We're working with neighbours, landowners, we're also working with organisations like the National Park, Natural England, the Environment Agency, the RSPB. It's a real collaborative attempt to make sure that the forestry that ultimately is created and will go on to be a huge benefit for society for the next 50 to 100 years is appropriate and is giving the right ecological benefits that we're looking for. With the advent of technology, forestry looks very different to how it did 20 years ago. We're now able to be much more sensitive about landscape features and working at that landscape scale. We're able to see how the creation or presence of a woodland in one part of the catchment can affect 100 miles away a city that might struggle with flooding or something similar. And so there's some real opportunities, I think, to kind of delve into that technology and just make sure that the woodlands that we have are both beneficial for the local community but also for the wider parts of Britain that might be affected by things, like I say, such as flooding.